So I have a question on the same line of kind of stuff. What do you think about now? Like a lot of these bodybuilders are dying. Cedric had recently passed away. Like there's, some guys who aren't as in the sense in the circuit of bodybuilding, but like Boston Lloyd had recently passed away. Obviously, Rich passed away in the past, but even more like pros are passing away here and there.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. Everybody's body is different though, so
Yeah.
everybody has their own way of doing things.
All right, what's going on, you guys? Nick here with Nick Strength and Power. I've got a couple of interesting stories for you guys today. The first story that I've got for you guys today, I thought this was pretty interesting. Former strongman and former World's Strongest Man competitor Terry Holland. He's competing in a bodybuilding show this weekend. He's done this before. He's competed in bodybuilding before. But I love a good transition, a crossover of someone that excelled at one sport kind of within this same realm of bodybuilding and powerlifting and strongman, and crosses over to something that they're not as familiar with and something a little bit more, outside of their comfort zone. And Terry Hollands, he was a really good strongman. He's like 6'7". He's gigantic as a strongman. His transformation is pretty crazy. He got up to like 430 pounds as a strongman. He's been top 3 at the World's Strongest Man. 2007 and 2011, I believe, were the 2 years that he placed third. And he's won shows like the 2019 Masters World's Strongest Man. The point is, he's a really prolific strongman competitor. Now he's kind of, dipping his toes, I guess you could say, into the bodybuilding world. And he's a couple days out. Like I said, he's competing on Sunday this weekend. And he looks pretty crazy. It's pretty crazy to see a guy with a frame like that. Like I said, he's like 6'6", 6'7", really big dude. He's coming down from a strongman physique where he was, up to like 430 pounds, which is insane. And his conditioning looks crazy. I mean, being a taller guy like that, it's a little bit harder to compete in bodybuilding, to fill out such a massive frame. It's a little bit harder to get the muscle more evenly distributed when you've got arms that long, legs that long. It's hard to fill out that much size. But these updates that he's been posting recently, I'm very impressed with the conditioning that he's bringing to this show. And who knows? He is a Masters competitor, so maybe it's not outside of the realm of possibility that at a Masters competition, he could potentially earn a pro card. But anyway, I just thought I'd share that with you guys. In my opinion, he looks really good, especially considering where he came from. And we've seen guys try this before. I mean, Larry Wheels came over from powerlifting, tried to do bodybuilding. Not everybody's successful with it, but I really do think, I've been seeing these updates over the past few weeks. I think he looks really good. His conditioning's crazy. And I look forward to seeing how he looks on stage this weekend. Now, next up in the news, we're getting really close to the Indy Pro. It's going to be next weekend. We're at the 1 week out mark, so we're probably going to see a lot of updates over the next few days, so expect that. But one guy that's really been making a lot of noise with the updates that he's been posting, especially recently, is Petar Klancir. He was one of the later additions to the lineup. I think everybody else kind of announced it, that they were doing the show earlier than him. So he announced it. We've been seeing more and more updates from him, and I would say the closer that we get to the show, the crazier he's looking and the more realistic it seems that he's going to be one of the top guys in this lineup. I'm really, really curious to see from a size standpoint how he stacks up in this lineup. Looking at these pictures, like I said in the last video, you look at him on Instagram, he looks like the biggest guy in the lineup. He's crazy dense, crazy round. His most muscular is a crazy pose for him. I do think at this point, looking at Justin looks a little bit drier. He looks like he's a little bit more ahead from the conditioning aspect than Petar is. But it certainly looks like on Instagram, and again, Justin is the favorite because he won last year and also because of his Arnold Classic showing and his Boston Pro showing. It certainly looks on Instagram that Petar Klancir is one of the biggest guys, like pound for pound muscle mass wise, in this lineup. He looks crazy. And I'm really going to be interested to see when he's actually on stage if this translates, because on Instagram, looking insane is one thing. On stage is another. And I'm curious to see once he's next to Justin, who's a big guy himself, once he's next to Blessing, another big guy, how big he looks in that lineup, or if he gets out-muscled and kind of lost in the mix. But I mean, just look at the delts on this guy. He's got like cannonball delts, and he looks like he's in really good shape. You can see striations in his chest. You can see striations in his delts. He's vascular. I'm optimistic that he's coming to impress. Speaking of which, we got another update from Blessing yesterday. He says it was 9 days out, and Blessing showing off the condition that he's in. One of the things that has really always impressed me about Blessing, when he's prepping for a show, all his update pictures, when he hits the ab shots, his serratus and the side of his abs is like crazy feathered and conditioned. It's just not something you see all too often anymore in men's open bodybuilding. You don't see a midsection like that. So that's one of the things that's really impressed me about Blessing is while he does carry crazy size, he's got crazy width with his back. He keeps his midsection relatively tight. In that detail, that feathering, that serratus, his obliques, his abs, I mean, it's really impressive when he hits that shot. And that kind of variation of an abs and thighs like that is something that I think is a very favorable pose for Blessing's physique. And then you go down to the legs. I mean, the legs have been something we've been talking about during the whole course of this prep for Blessing. That's one of the things that I think last year at his pro debut let him down a little bit because his upper body was so impressive and it was so developed and his lower body just wasn't quite there. Certainly in this update, his quads look pretty big. I don't know if it's the angle. I don't know if it's the lighting. I don't know if it's just the pose. His legs look pretty good here from a size perspective. And these updates from Blessing have me excited to see him on stage again. I think this Indy Pro is going to be a good show. You know, it's not too often we get these shows where we have a lineup like this, where it's not the biggest names, it's not the best bodybuilders. I mean, and I don't mean that as disrespect. I mean, it's not like an Olympia lineup. It's a bunch of guys that we don't normally talk about during the course of the year, but I think it's still going to end up being a really good show and a really competitive show, and I think some of these guys are going to catch us by surprise with how good they actually look. Like, we know to expect at an Arnold Classic or an Olympia a crazy competitive lineup. We expect some guys to look insane, but it's not too often we get a show like this where there's some lesser-known names where these guys can turn up looking crazy. Now, let's talk about what I feel is the most important story in this video, and that is a recent podcast hosted by Bradley Martyn, Bradley Martyn's Raw Talk. He had Ronnie Coleman on that podcast, which I thought was a really good podcast, by the way. And he asked Ronnie a very important question, something that I think, should be talked about. He said, "What do you think about all these bodybuilders that have been dying lately?" And one quote that really stuck out to me here, I'm going to roll a clip in a second to give you guys what Ronnie actually said, but he said, "Bodybuilding is not worth dying for." And Bradley kind of asks him, he says, what would your advice be? I mean, what do you think the reason for this is? And Ronnie kind of says, I thought this was an interesting response. He talks about diuretic testing, back in the late 90s, early 2000s that they implemented in the IFBB because Mohammed Benaziza had passed away on one of those European bodybuilding tours right before a show. And the reason for that wasn't gear. It was diuretics. And if you guys don't know what diuretics are, essentially it's something that bodybuilders use at the last minute right before a show, peak week, to get out that extra little bit of water. It's basically to dehydrate you. It's to clear you out and kind of get that, grainy, get that water out in between the skin and the muscle. And it really does turn out to be a pretty dangerous process. And I thought it was interesting that Ronnie, kind of made a point to say that, after 2001, where Jay Cutler failed the diuretics test and he was going to sue them because they weren't going to give him his prize money. They stopped testing after that. And I thought that it was interesting that Ronnie pointed to that as a potential contributing factor for so many modern bodybuilders that are professionals passing away. And he made a good point that, when he was coming up and he was competing, he said Mohammed Benaziza was the only one. We didn't have, multiple pro bodybuilders a year passing away. And he also made a good point that between them implementing the testing in 2001, when they were testing everybody for diuretics, not for gear use, nobody died in that time frame. So I thought that raised an interesting discussion for this video and for you guys to talk about in the comments below. Is that something to consider? We're talking so much, everybody has an opinion on what can be done, to stop these deaths in bodybuilding. And we've heard a lot of different perspectives ranging from mandatory drug testing to mandatory health screenings to mandatory, blood work to be able to compete. But I think Ronnie is the first person that I've seen to directly say, put an emphasis on diuretic testing and potentially even be pointing the finger at diuretics as being the possible reason why things are so dangerous now. Granted, I'm not saying any of this applied necessarily to Sean Roden or Cedric McMillan, but you did have George Peterson pass away right before a show, and maybe that could have been a contributing factor, but I don't know necessarily if you could blame diuretics for Sean or Cedric. But the more important point that Ronnie really stressed in this video, and I think should be talked about and shared and discussed, is get your health checked out. That is the most important thing, I think, at the end of the day with this conversation, is just do the work. Go get checked out. Get your blood drawn. Get your blood tested. Get whatever screenings. If something feels wrong, go check it out. And that's the best preventative measure for dying, is just knowing what's going on. And I think every time, someone like Ronnie or somebody important in the industry says something like this, It should be shared. It should be distributed. It should be talked about, because that is the most important bit of advice, I think, for any young guy coming up in bodybuilding right now, is just make sure you get tested, get checked out, and be safe about what you're doing, as safe as you possibly can be if you're going to be doing that. But I'm going to roll that clip from the video for you guys here. You can watch the whole thing on Bradley Martyn's channel if you want to. But this was kind of the part that was the highlight for me and kind of the takeaway.
I missed a couple, but I made up for
it. yeah, for sure. So I have a question on the same line of kind of stuff. What do you think about now? Like a lot of these bodybuilders are dying. Cedric had recently passed away. Like there's, you know, some guys who aren't as in the circuit of bodybuilding, but like Boston Lloyd had recently passed away. Obviously, you know, Rich passed away in the past, but even more like pros are passing away here and there.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. Everybody's body is different though, you know, so
yeah.
Everybody has their own way of doing things. It's kind of hard. You know, when I was coming up, we had one guy die, and they started drug testing every show.
Yeah.
He died because of diuretics, of course, you know.
Yeah, very hard on the body.
So they start drug testing for diuretics every show, and nobody passed away, nobody died or nothing until they stopped. And I'll never forget when they stopped. They stopped, see, he died in, what year was that? 1995 or 1996, I think.
Who was it? Did he die on stage?
It was Benaziza. He died on the European tour. I know I wasn't Mr. Olympia back then, and I think it was either 96 or 97.
Yeah.
Cause and they drug tested every single show after that.
In the IFBB?
In the IFBB.
What? I thought they didn't drug test in the IFBB.
Yeah, they did, because one guy died.
Yeah.
And you know, and the vice president wasn't having it back then. He knew what that would do to the sport.
Yeah.
So it was a drug test, and it was a real one.
Yeah.
It wasn't no fake one. You couldn't say, yeah, I took the test, but it wasn't a real test. It was a real test. And if you fail, they took your prize money.
Really?
Yeah. NASA failed. They took his money. That was in 1997.
Were they testing for diuretics specifically? Because they knew that everyone was on gear.
They were testing for diuretics specifically.
Okay, so it wasn't like you're on gear, you can't.
No, it wasn't for any gear. Because he didn't die because of that. He died because of the diuretics.
Yeah.
And that's what they tested for.
Yeah, the Lasix, Aldactone, that kind of shit.
All that, yeah. So we couldn't take any diuretics back then.
Okay.
Until 2001, when Jay failed the test.
And then they stopped. Then they stopped testing.
Yep, because Jay told him he was gonna sue him.
Oh.
And they were like, okay, well, we won't
keep testing.
We won't.
Oh.
And you get a chance to keep your prize money too. So we'll.
Oh shit.
Yeah, we'll just do away with the testing.
So Jay changed that.
Jay.
Wow.
Jay changed that. Yeah.
Damn.
They didn't test no more after that.
Yeah. So what do you think a bodybuilder would need to like be aware of? Because obviously gear is not the healthiest thing in the world for anyone to be doing, right? But what do you think a bodybuilder would need to be aware of in order to do that in a healthy way? Because obviously, you know,
I was always testing my I did a full, complete blood test.
I love this. Yeah.
At least 3 times a year.
I love it.
Test determine my liver function, my kidney function,
your heart,
my heart,
yeah,
everything. I did a full blood work every single year, 3 times a year.
Yeah,
and it always came back good.
Yeah.
I'm still doing it today.
Of course.
Once I found out, you know, if you do everything the right way, you know, you won't.
Yeah,
you'll stay alive.
Yeah, this is one of the things.
Your kidneys, heart, all your major arteries are functioning. You okay?
Yeah, this is one of the things I think is really important to make note and for people to listen and hear is like people really underestimate the value of knowing what's happening in their body.
Know what's happening in your body, and my doctor would tell me, "Man, your blood panel look better than mine." I'm like, Yeah, I'm taking good care of myself.
It's amazing. Yeah, no, it's amazing. But that's what I'm saying. There's a lot of people, I think nowadays, like people aren't as, I don't know, maybe they're afraid of getting their stuff checked out, or maybe they don't know that they can get their stuff checked out. But there is so much benefit to knowing what's going on, because you can make little changes and you could affect it.
And that's going to wrap it up for the video, guys. I hope you did, in fact, enjoy it. Make sure you give it a thumbs up if you did enjoy it. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you have not subscribed yet already. As always, I love you guys. I appreciate you guys. Nick Strength and Power, signing out.